For the Investing News Network, I am Brian McGovern, here today for an end of summer 2020 cannabis chat on the Canadian market. With me today is Monica Chadha, EY's Canada National Cannabis Leader. Monica, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Brian.
Monica, we're going to be discussing a little bit about the Canadian cannabis market so far in 2020. On a big picture level, I'm curious just sort of what have been your biggest takeaways, the things that maybe have interested you the most, or maybe surprised you the most during this year?
Yeah, I think this year what's been trending, not only through the course of the year, but even now, is we are seeing a change of the guard. So not just at the executive leadership levels, but it's certainly cascading down to other levels of management. And that's in response to matching the skills, the experience, the competencies of the leadership team to where companies foresee themselves headed. We've seen rationalization of products happening and quite the opposite, innovation in product SKUs as more data becomes available and we start to learn a little bit more about consumer preferences. There are companies that are making some big bets around innovation in product lines. So we can expect to see that. Other things that are trending again throughout the course of the year and will continue to do so is globalization. That's not going anywhere. It's still very much on the strategic forefront of many companies. And I think what also deserves an honorable mention is that we will continue to see companies from the adjacent sector demonstrating an interest into this sector. So over the course of the next probably 12 to 24 months, we can expect to see some brands, entering into this sector. I think overall, those are some of the big picture trends that we've been seeing as a whole in the industry.
Yeah. On the point of globalization, since legalization in Canada, on the lead up to it as well, the discussion became about how these Canadian companies could share the knowledge that they've been accumulating, the experience that they've been accumulating. From a business perspective, obviously the idea of setting the trends and setting sort of the ways of the industry moving forward on a global scale, that seemed to be a very real possibility. The Canadian markets have struggled from a financial perspective for a little bit, but I'm curious about how you see the relationship of Canadian companies and their members and executives leading into the conversation on a global sense, and sort of how those two interact and how those move forward from now on.
Yeah, I think with a comment around changing of the guard and getting new executive leadership teams in, it's certainly inviting individuals into the organization who do have that global experience and who can run a public multinational organization as global expansion occurs. So as other jurisdictions open up, and Canadian companies have the ability to operate in those, in those jurisdictions. Certainly having the experience of leadership operating within or amongst those jurisdictions help. So I think you can expect to see a bit of that happening in order to bridge the gap in terms of lack of experience, operating within those jurisdictions.
I'm curious if you can expand about sort of the awareness or sort of the market penetration of brands in Canada. There's been much to be said about what goes into a brand, what makes a brand seem authentic or seem legit in the eyes of consumers. Recently, there's been market reports indicating that consumers are still struggling to really differentiate among these brands in the regulated market. Do you expect to see any kind of event or any kind of launch or any sort of poignant moment that can really start making these brands pop off and maybe even begin to get a mark with consumers?
In the near future, I think you can expect to see much of the same of what you're articulating. And the only reason why is certainly the restrictions around branding, marketing, advertising, those lines are blurred as it pertains to our regulations here in Canada. And until organizations have the ability to actually communicate their brands outwardly where it doesn't cross that line of being interpreted as marketing or advertising, we're going to operate in the same state that we do now. So a lot of the branding and brands that percolate up to the top in terms of SKUs that gain popularity amongst consumers, it really is at this particular day and age through social media or through direct or indirect lines of education that's happening in the general populace. So I think that's what you can expect to see in the near term, is that it really is just based on what they're hearing through these public forums, but less so through direct forms of what could be perceived as marketing or advertising from these bigger companies that hold brands or that do want certain brands to percolate up to the top.
Yeah. Now, of course, 2020 has been marked by the COVID-19 pandemic across the world. In Canada, is seemingly the country seems to be staring at a potential second wave coming in. With this event potentially in around the corner, what are some of the biggest concerns that you have for the Canadian cannabis market and its players as we head into the last bit of 2020 and maybe a little bit more as well into 2021?
Yeah, I think, with the pandemic, unfortunately, it is industry agnostic. It's hit almost every sector, and cannabis is not immune to it. We have seen the impacts that a lockdown does have on the sector. In some instances, certain revenue streams, it certainly affected production early days, where partners or vendors that are involved in the value chain have been, their business has been interrupted. That's affected it. And there's been a little bit more stability now that time has lapsed and they've realized how to operate under this environment. On a bigger picture level, what we have seen are capital constraints. It is becoming difficult for some companies to fund their current operations and their growth strategies going forward. So we've seen, unfortunately, some companies under distress, and we can anticipate to see more of that. On the flip side of what's happened is that it has allowed some companies who have found the pace of growth to be overwhelming to hit the pause button. So we've certainly seen some recalibration of their strategies kind of going forward and taking advantage of some of the lull that's happening in the industry.
I see. Now, as a bit of a last thing, EY has been covering cannabis for a long time now. It's been directly involved with the industry and offering a lot of expertise and commentary. I'm curious from your perspective, just sort of how you've seen the evolution of this market. It's had ups and downs. It's had really interesting rushes. It's had lots of momentum and then some slowdowns. How do you evaluate the pace that cannabis in Canada has had so far, and you expect that to sort of continue heading into the next maybe 5 years or stabilize a little bit more? How are you seeing the future for the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it is an industry unlike no other, completely unprecedented. I made the comment three and a half, maybe 4 years ago that I was shocked that companies within this industry were talking about innovation on day 2 of opening up the doors, and it continuously occurs. And it's innovation throughout the institution, right? So it's not just in product lines and product SKUs and product mix, but it's innovation in terms of what production looks like. It's innovation all the way along the value chain. So that to me is extremely intriguing, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon. I think we're going to see some new innovative, not only, like I said, products, but ways of production that certainly is going to go beyond anything that we've seen before. So it absolutely surprises me when I see how much emphasis is being placed on that, where certain mature industries that have been operating for quite some time are struggling with R&D and innovation. I mean, here's a net new nascent sector, completely dynamic, working at a pace that's, again, unprecedented, that is managing to keep up, with that fluctuation. So I think, there's great things to be seen. I think there's a lot to be learned, as you mentioned or alluded to before, from the Canadian market. And I do think you'll see a lot of growth with some of these Canadian companies, especially as other legal jurisdictions open up. That too will contribute to, enhanced growth within these Canadian companies.
Sounds good, and sounds like we have a lot to look forward to. Monica, I want to thank you again for your time today.
Thank you very much.
For the Investing News Network, I'm Brian McGovern. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for a lot more interviews. We'll see you next time.